Today we face a very serious multidimensional crisis. This crisis affects all spheres of life. In other words, it is an economic crisis, it is a political crisis, it is a social crisis, an ecological crisis, even a cultural crisis. So the question is there any common thread? That is, can we find any common cause for the various aspects of the crisis? And the answer to my mind is yes. The cause is always the concentration of power at various levels. It is the concentration of economic power which leads to the economic crisis, of political power which leads to the political crisis, and so on. Political crisis is a byproduct of the dynamic of representative democracy. Representative democracy is not a system that was always there. It was created almost about the same time as the system of the market economy 200 years ago, and its dynamic has led to the present situation where it's not even parliaments anymore that take important decisions. It's not even the governing parties, but it is just cliques around the president or the prime minister which take all important decisions. This creates huge alienation. That's why today we don't have any more mass political parties. People do not become members of parties as used to be the case in the past. Not only this, today many people do not even bother to vote. So this is a manifestation of the huge political crisis that the system of representative democracy is going through at the moment. Therefore, if you look at every aspect of the present crisis, you will see that the cause, the ultimate cause behind it is the concentration of power in some form. And that's why we need an inclusive democracy, because an inclusive democracy is the abolition of this concentration of power at the institutional level, the abolition of this concentration of power in all its forms, and the creation of conditions of equal sharing of power, of political, economic power, and so on. I'm Takis Fotopulos. I'm a writer and editor of the international journal Democracy and Nature, the International Journal for Inclusive Democracy. And I have been teaching economics at the University of North London in the past for over 20 years. I would like to talk about the project of inclusive democracy. And I would like to start first with what is inclusive democracy? I think it is important to stress that the inclusive democracy project is not just an economic model, but it is a broader political project which aims to remake society at all levels, at the political level, the economic level, the social level, and of course in the ecological sphere. The overall aim of the inclusive democracy project is to create a society in which people determine themselves, in which, in other words, the demos, as it was the classical concept for the people, the demos has overall control over the political sphere, the economic sphere, the social sphere in general. So the inclusive democracy project, in a sense, is a synthesis of the two major traditions, the two major historical traditions, the socialist tradition and the democratic tradition, and also of the currents that developed in the last 30 or 40 years, the new social movements, the feminist movement, the ecological movement, the identity movements of various sorts, and so on. In other words, the inclusive democracy project is a synthesis of all those historical experiences of the socialist and also of the democratic tradition and all those new social movements. And in this sense, we can say that the inclusive democracy project is neither a theoretical construct, but it is the product of all those historical experiences, nor it is a utopia. And it is not a utopia because there are already trends all around us leading to a society which in various aspects resembles the inclusive democracy society. There are all over experiments going on with alternative institutions, and whenever there is an insurrection, like for example the recent Argentinian one, we have seen people organizing themselves in general assemblies and trying to organize political and economic life according to principles like the principles that I'm going to explain in a moment are the principles of the inclusive democracy project. The four components of the inclusive democracy society are first what we may call political or direct democracy, second economic democracy, third democracy at a social level, and fourth ecological democracy. So let's see briefly what we mean by each of those components. Political or direct democracy means the authority of demos, of people, over the political sphere. In other words, political democracy implies that it is people collectively that take decisions about all political affairs and directly without representatives, because what we call today representative democracy is a fake democracy, since there can be no representation of my will or nobody's will. That is, you can either express your will directly or you can simply delegate a certain kind of wish of you, but you cannot have somebody else decide for you. So political or direct democracy is the type of society where people directly and collectively decide for themselves on all important aspects of political life. That means that in a direct democracy, every resident in a particular area takes part in the democratic process. We shall assume that usually this could not be a community of more than 30 to 50,000 people. In the same way as we define political democracy as the authority of demos over the political sphere, we can define economic democracy as the authority of demos over the economic sphere. This means that it is the citizen body, that is all people at mature age, which is decided by the assemblies, all people at a certain age decide all major economic, take decisions on all major economic problems, particularly those affecting the meeting of basic needs. In an inclusive democracy, there should be no private ownership of productive resources, of the means of production, but instead the productive resources should be owned by the demos. There should be demotic ownership of the means of production. The third component of inclusive democracy is democracy at a social level. That means at a micro level, at the level of the workplace, the household, the educational place, and so on. In all those places, there should be democracy in the sense that there should be equal distribution of power. There should be no distinction, in other words, between workers working in a workplace. There should be no distinction. There should be, in other words, equal distribution of power between men and women. There should be equal distribution of power between teachers and students or pupils and so on. And finally, we have the fourth component of inclusive democracy, the ecological democracy component, which means that the inclusive democracy aims to create the subjective and objective conditions so that man is reintegrated into nature, society is reintegrated into nature. This is important because what we have today is a kind of situation where society is separate from nature. We see nature as an instrument to achieve certain objectives. The main objective is economic growth, of course, and as a result we suffer the crisis that we have at the moment, the serious ecological crisis. So, having seen what is an inclusive democracy and why we need an inclusive democracy, the next important thing is to see how an economic democracy, that is how this basic component of inclusive democracy will work, what sort of institutions we can imagine that would secure equal distribution of economic power. This is important not in order to prescribe some kind of regime that should follow in the future. This is silly because in fact it is the democratic assemblies of the future that will decide the form that their institution will take. What we can only do here is to give an idea of why such a system is feasible, how it can work, and make some proposals that would implement all the basic principles I mentioned before. The model, therefore, of economic democracy that I'm going to explain in a moment represents also a synthesis, as the whole project of inclusive democracy represents a synthesis of two systems that we have known in the past, the planning system on the one hand and the market system that we still have. The basic element of the planning system, or the basic aim, if you like, of the planning system was that it aimed at securing the meeting of basic needs of our people. On the other hand, the basic element that is produced or presented by supporters of the market system as its main strong point is freedom of choice. However, neither of the two systems has worked as in theory. That is,